When I first started The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners, I was thinking I'd fall somewhere in the middle. Not good, not bad, but alive. Well, that's not how things went down. I see Saints and Sinners as an experiment in thematic game design. The story takes a bit of a back seat as the primary loop of looting, shooting, and sneaking is driving, and the secondary loop of focusing on long-term survival and resource allocation rides shotgun. Not to say the story is bad, it's just a bit underdeveloped. However, as I move on to focus on the good, I have to acknowledge that even this is a thematic decision. I still don't really know what the tower and the reclaimed stood for, but my character didn't care about that, and neither will yours. What my character cared about was just making it through the day, and the next day, and the day after that. I was going for a pragmatic playthrough, and trying to hold on to what little humanity I could spare. Take what I need, try not to kill anybody, and do whatever will lead to the least bloodshed without risking my neck. I really didn't have the luxury of thinking about which faction most deserved mercy. All I knew is that they were both all over the city. They'd both shoot at me if I got caught sneaking around, and they both had something I needed to make sure I stayed fed and healthy. In terms of gameplay, both factions function identically, and through the lens of the pragmatism that the apocalypse demanded, that's exactly how they had to be filed away in my head: enemies. What I'm going for with this video is to shed some light on how these gameplay systems all serve to emphasize the themes of the game, if not the base level narrative. So, with that introduction to the tone of the story out of the way, let's get into those themes. This is where the game really shines for me, and it's what took the greatest VR game I've played yet and made it into one of the most memorable games I've played lately. First off, I've got to give brief lip service to the classic blues song turned classic Led Zeppelin song, When the Levee Breaks, as it's a good launchpad for the game's themes. It's a song about the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927. Hundreds were killed and hundreds of thousands were evacuated. The song is, in particular, about one man who survived the floods and lost his home and family. The man had a bit of a rebirth at this moment, and it was a new beginning for him, tragic as it was. Well, the game follows much the same story. It takes place in New Orleans, not far from Mississippi at all, and the flood is where things start to get interesting. That song, When the Levee Breaks, is also about the mounting tension of knowing that sooner or later the levee's gonna come crashing down and we're all gonna drown. Well, we see a whole lot of levees getting ready to break over the course of this game. For one, New Orleans is flooded in-game, meaning conditions are even worse than a zombie apocalypse usually dictates. Nowhere to evacuate to, leaving your home is suicide if you can even get to the door, but the floodwaters are rising. Secondly, we have the proverbial flood of zombies we're dealing with. In the world of The Walking Dead, everyone whose brain is intact turns into a zombie when they die, bar none. While this game takes place a good ways into the apocalypse, when most of the original walkers would have died off, the flood led to a whole new batch of walkers, as it suddenly wasn't even an option to go loot for medicine, and I'm sure plenty of people drowned too. Almost anything that was living in the city would have died. So why would you ever live in a place like New Orleans during a zombie apocalypse? One simple reason: the reserve. One last military stockpile, locked behind a single key, and a whole lot of floodwater keeping the doors sealed. This is enough rations and weaponry to keep somebody fed for years, and naturally the two major factions won't in on it. We also have poor Casey, who's trapped inside of the reserve doing his best to keep the floodwaters in check while we sort out a pump regulator issue to drain this place. This is yet another set of mounting tensions, another levee getting ready to break. Once this place gets unlocked, we're going to see one of, if not the biggest faction war we've ever seen in the Walking Dead lore. Whoever wins, we're going to see packs of them roaming the street for months, just looking for survivors to take down. This brings us to the last major levee, the player. If there's one major theme across nearly all zombie media, particularly The Walking Dead, it's that the humans, once pushed to their limit, aren't all that different from the zombies. I mean, we've got the very title of the franchise. The Walking Dead, of course, refers to the zombies, but it also refers to the living, surviving on borrowed time. We almost constantly see characters who have completely lost it and are about as rabid as any zombie. And for one much more subtle detail that I've always appreciated, one of the best ways to survive the city in this world is to disembowel a walker and cover yourself in its entrails in order to trick the other walkers into thinking you're one of them. The smart Walking Dead survivor is literally dressing up as a zombie. Anyways, Saints and Sinners is no stranger to those themes, but it handles them better than almost any zombie media I've seen. Again, what's going to happen when the levee breaks? What kind of person will you become? Will you try to help other people to safety? Will you try to save yourself at the cost of anyone else? It's the simple floodwater and the use of this song on the radio that bridges the thematic gap between the location and the classic zombie apocalypse theme of humans being the real monsters.
Let's keep calm, okay?
Well, how do these game mechanics emphasize that theme? By making you become a monster. Now, I'm not saying you have to rob or kill every survivor you come across to make it to the end of the game, but you'll definitely be killing some. It's probably possible to do all of this non-lethally, but you'd have to be godlike at stealth. Nobody's doing that on their first playthrough. You don't need to feel bad for quick drawing your pistol and shooting someone in the head when they're trying to rob you. After all, they're just going to rob someone else next, someone that might need their medicine even more than you need yours.
If you want to dodge death, I suggest you hand over every drop of medicine.
The rain starts falling. You don't need to feel bad for denying supplies to someone who's begging you for them. It's rough out there, and there's a very strong chance that one simple bandage or meal or bottle of pills is all that's standing between you and death. It keeps on raining. You don't need to feel bad for being coaxed into executing a prisoner of some faction. After all, they have the guns and the numbers. No way you're making it out of here alive without following their orders, and no way you're talking these guys down. Your shoes are getting waterlogged. You don't need to feel bad about capping an enemy from stealth. After all, the only reason you're in here is to get intel that'll get you into the reserve. It's the only way you'll survive this place, and if that guard sees you, you're dead. Simple as that. The levee's gonna break. Priority number 1 was always to survive the next few years by making it into the reserve, and priority number 2 was always to do as little harm to the world as possible. But in this case, those two things are mutually exclusive. When the situation is quite literally life or death, everything becomes justifiable. Opening the reserve won't just save my life, it'll save the life of everybody who's left after the battle. It'll save Casey's life, and it'll help May Benoit and her daughter escape the city. May is probably the most important character to our player character's downfall. We want to get into the reserve, and she has the key. We could have killed her and taken the key when we first met her, and we knew that, but we're not murderers. Well, May Benoit makes us one. She has us infiltrating several tower and reclaimed outposts to get intel that will help her, and as I said earlier, the idea of sneaking in and out of these places without killing anyone is ridiculous. Sure, you might pull off 1 or 2 perfect infiltrations, but there's absolutely no way you're going to get all of them perfectly. But it's worth it to save Casey and May, who are seemingly innocent in all of this. May doesn't realize what she's doing to us and to the factions by sicking us on them, and Casey is totally innocent. Again, we're still just justifying all of this messed up stuff that we're doing, and the rain is still falling. Well, jumping ahead a bit, the reserve is finally open. Odds are we've killed at least 25 people by our own hand, and now a lot more are going to die. When we open the reserve, it takes 10 minutes before both factions are at the front gates of the church. Dozens upon dozens of people are fighting it out, and needless to say that most of them will die in the fighting. We eventually get in and decide what we're gonna do. The only way Casey is gonna avoid drowning is if we flood the armory, which will of course mean that there won't be nearly as many weapons left salvageable. However, there is still a ton of food and a ton of weapons available. We could choose to let Casey die and get even more weaponry and provisions ourselves, but the last thing New Orleans needs is more guns fueling this war. Flooding the armory and letting Casey live is more or less the obvious choice. Well, when we're headed through the church to meet the newly freed Casey, we find him and May Benoit having a showdown by the church bells. The factions killed May's daughter, and for revenge she wants to ring the church bells, causing all the walkers in town to head over and indirectly killing all the soldiers outside. Naturally, Casey wants us to shoot her and put an end to all of the needless bloodshed. Well, I tried talking her down, and when that didn't work, Casey put one in her head. The first person Casey had ever killed, and it was debatably our fault. That murder is going to set the tone for Casey's entire life after being saved by us. The next time he has to kill somebody, it'll be a little bit easier to justify. Well, after all was said and done, I got into the reserve, stashed what little provisions and weaponry I could carry, and I got back on my boat to head home. The credits rolled, and I got a 1 week later card. Now I could go out into town, try to get the medicine I would need for the next couple of days, and see how the factions are responding to the generous gift of food and weapons that I had given to them by opening the reserve. As soon as I got into the streets, I was immediately put off by how few walkers were around. I walked down this alleyway, and somebody tried to rob me. Luckily, I'd gotten pretty good with my pistol by this point in the game. One quick shot to the head, and he wouldn't be hurting anyone else. I headed into this blue home and started looting when I heard gunshots outside. I went to the upstairs balcony and saw a group of reclaimed soldiers fighting some tower soldiers, and I realized that the violence only increased with what I'd done. May Benoit convinced me to kill 25 plus people, also that I could open the floodgates and make the fighting between the two major factions even worse. If the zombies and the flooding weren't enough, now you were sure to get caught in the crossfire if you stepped foot outside. I had well and truly destroyed any hope New Orleans had of recovering for years. I took one of the worst places to be during the apocalypse and made it even deadlier. Indirectly, it wouldn't be a stretch at all to say that at the very least 60 people died either by my hand or by my actions. Well, that didn't change priority number 1, getting my medicine. With my nice vantage point and my fancy new weapons, I was able to dispatch the survivors of the firefight easily enough. I didn't even think about it. They'd kill me if they saw me, so I'd be crazy to not treat them the same. 4 more deaths by my hand. Whatever, I needed my pills. I figured it'd be a shame to not put some of these new guns to more use, and I was almost out of shivs anyways, so I went full Evil Dead and started wandering from house to house, shotgunning any walkers I saw, and taking any loot that was immediately obvious. I found my pills. Sure, I'd seen at least 8 human deaths today, but it was a pretty good day. Got my work done. For having just killed 4 people, the simple fact that I found medicine had me in pretty high spirits. I was walking back to the skiff, cockily flipping my pistol around in celebration of another productive day. I wasn't fazed at all. And that's when I started thinking about how scarce supplies were getting. How many soldiers were killing each other for whatever scraps were left of the reserve by this point. How Mae Benoit and her daughter died and Casey became a killer. How I had personally killed dozens of people to make this happen. And the floodwater was impossible to ignore. I'd lost my humanity. I was still sentient, but I was walking as dead as any random zombie I'd taken down that day. I went from trying my best to help New Orleans to shooting any armed human on sight. All hope was lost for everybody, and at the heart of it all was my simple will to survive. I was a blight on this land. It wasn't just that I had made mistakes that led to violence, it was that I had lost my own humanity. If I could have done it all again, I would have killed Mae Benoit the moment I saw her and taken the key. I'd leave her daughter without a mother, and I'd let Casey drown so that I could get more supplies. I wasn't the beacon of morality that I wanted to be. The animalistic pragmatism had completely taken over. I set Casey on the same path that I was at the end of, and I'd go on to set plenty of other people on that path as soon as they saw how well I was doing for myself. I was crouched down in the attic watching the water fill up my house. It was clear from the first time I killed somebody where all of this was leading to. Well, that's when the levee broke.